people ask a lot of times, they say, well, people get all excited. Let's, what can I do? How do I get started, etc. What you're doing right now is the most important thing. This is getting started. And you need to stay on this plane here for a while, because what this work is like twofold. So it's not just the external education that you're getting here. It's the inner work that has to happen. What white supremacy has done over the hundreds of years was begin to numb white people from what the real issues are, from the heart. If you're going to be angry about anything, be angry about this lie being foisted upon you. Back in 1681, when the British had their miscegenation laws that they put on the colonies, because indentured servants of all colors and backgrounds, and also people that were there, were starting to get together. And so the British, afraid of the elite, afraid of losing control of the people in the colonies, came up with the miscegenation laws of 1681. And those miscegenation laws, it was the first time that the designation white was used, the very first time in the colonies. Before, someone had done, I think it was Theodore Allen, a researcher in the 20s and 30s. He did research. He went back through all of the colonial records of all of the colonies, and there was never a mention of white anywhere. It took him a long time to go through all of those. He got all the colonial records. There was no mention of white. White was mentioned the very first time, white and black, mentioned the very first time in 1681, the miscegenation laws that the British held down. And what those laws said, for the first time, it privileged one group and not another. Before 1681, because there were Africans had been traveling everywhere. And there were Africans in the colonies. And there were traders. They had work that they were doing. And they had the exact same rights, every single right that the Europeans had. People could vote. They could testify in court. They could own guns. They could have property. All of the rights that the European colonists had, the Africans had. When the miscegenation laws of 1681 came down, that was the first time they took all of those natural privileges away from Africans. And only white people could have them. At first, the white people were very, very confused because no one thought of themselves as white. This was a brand new designation that did not exist before 1681. People thought of themselves as German, French, Swedish, Italian, whatever. They were not white. So here comes this law that says you are now white, and you better pay attention to that. If you are white, you're going to give you this. You are able to have land. You are able to continue to have guns. You will continue to be able to testify in court. You can hold office. You can have all of these rights. Simultaneously, anyone non-white, but specifically black, those rights that they previously enjoyed were taken away, all of them. If you were black, you could not own a gun. If you were black, you could not testify in court against anyone. And so little by little, that prevailed until it just was. And those laws have not ceased. So I covered a lot of this on the first class. Sean is kind enough here that he filmed all of our classes, class 1, class 2, this one here. So if you'd like to review anything, you can go on YouTube, go to Lakewood Presbyterian Church, I believe, put that in the search, and the classes should come up, class 1, 2, and then this one here whenever he posts it. So if you want additional information on that. But I want to, as we go forward, I really want you to see how all of this and these laws and rules moved forward. How do we get to where we are? Why do we have the society that we have right now? Why, no matter what Senator McConnell says, the United States is a racist country. Even before we became the United States. By the time that the Constitution was written, 150, say from, was it 1619, maybe 157 years or so, we had been operating this way. So yes, it is, racism is baked into our country. So the issue is, how do we begin to look at this, and then that's when you can begin to have strategies to dismantle something. But if your heart isn't in it, and like I said, what white supremacy, this false narrative of white supremacy, which was political, it was a political institution. That was the basis of it, social political institution. This was all about power. And if you cannot feel your way through this, because what this did was it impacted people in different ways. It impacted black people with the I am not good enough, the inferiority, and that was created by the white supremacy. And we will treat you a certain way based on, and then we will get in all of the sciences, we'll get the scientists, the geneticists, religion, education. We will pull in all of our social structures to prove this point. How did it impact white people, the new white people? How did it impact white people? Well, people began to think that they were better. Why? The scientists said so. The school said so. The church said so. We can find religious scripture that says so. And so over hundreds of years, it just is something that now whiteness is invisible to you. It's almost like living in a bubble, that you're not aware of what is really going on in black people's lives, or if you want to broaden it to people of color, but I don't particularly like that term. I am here specifically speaking about the impact on the lives of black people. But over a period of time, one becomes totally unaware of any privileges. It's like, well, hey, I work hard, etc. Yes, this is not to say that no one worked hard. Of course, white people worked hard. But as we go through this, as we look at Reconstruction, you will see how white people were advantaged during Reconstruction. Who got reparations after the war?
Nobody.
That's right. Say it loud.
Those who owned slaves.
That's right. By the government. The government gave them back their plantations. After promising black people that, okay, it's 1865, the last of the black people in Texas found out that, you know, the war was over and that they were free meaning with the clothes on your back. And the government said, all right, what we'll do is we'll divide up some of this, we'll give you some land, and we'll divide it up. We'll give you 40 acres, and since we have an overflow of mules from the U.S. Army, we'll give you 40 acres and a mule. And think of this for a minute. When people, I hear people talk about, you know, oh, I'm so afraid that, you know, black people are going to do to us what we did to them. What was the first thing black people did the minute they said you were free? What happened?
They went to work.
Went to work. Were there any massacres? No. Some people dropped their tools where they were standing and said, I'm out of here. I'm gone. And they asked them, well, where are you going? And they said, anywhere but here. I'm out. We out. That's what that means. We out. Massacres of white people. All black people wanted to do was, okay, okay, you say we're done with being enslaved. Give us the 40 acres and the mule, and we will be on our way. We will build our schools. We will build churches. We will have our farms. We will take care of our families. We'll start some business. We'll create a town. We're ready to go. And there were some that were able to do that. And 2 years later, it was all taken away by the government. 2 years later. All the land that was given to black people was given back to the plantation owners. You see, so to get rid of the whole idea that, you know, black people are out to get you, black people just want the same freedoms, still fighting for citizenship, I have something to read to the first Congress of 1790. I keep it on my phone because it is the first congressional act where for naturalization. I keep it on my phone. I'll read it to you. So the whole idea that there's going to be some huge backlash from black people is totally false. However, as you will read or go into the work of Dr. Carol Anderson, when she talks about white rage and what is white rage, I think on the page that has all the terms, etc., I think it's on there. And basically, white rage is that anytime there is an advancement or a perceived advancement by black people, there is a white lash back. For example, when President Obama was elected, I just seriously thought about leaving the country because I said that the pushback from this is really going to be very severe, and it was. So I just want to say those things to just set the groundwork, so that should take care of whoever wasn't here for the first class. Let's get into Reconstruction. It was very long, 2 hours and 44 minutes, but there was a very specific reason that I wanted to use that particular film, that documentary, and the reason why is because it very clearly showed you what the Southern strategy is that is operating right now, 2022. Is anybody who spoke last week? Be silent for a little bit, because I'm encouraging to, this is practice, right? For everybody who wants, oh, what's the next step? If you cannot talk about racism, because this is the largest social issue in our country. If you can't talk about it, we can't change it. If we can't have a dialogue, we can't change anything. So, you have to leave shame, guilt, and whatever other icky feelings at the door. And eventually, I want you to really work on flushing that out of your system. You have to flush that out of your system. There is no one alive on the planet. There's no one alive in this room that was responsible for what happened. Nobody. So just drop it, please. Just drop it. I'm so ashamed of it. Okay, just drop it. Do not be ashamed of being white. There is nothing wrong with being white. There's nothing wrong with being black. There's nothing wrong with being Hispanic. There's nothing wrong with any of that. So don't go there. But you're here because you want to know, and you want to learn, and you want to grow. So this is how we do it. Our accomplices. I like that, don't you? Yeah. Our accomplices. All of you are accomplices in moving all of this forward and making changes. So who would like to just make a comment about what there was a question about Reconstruction. I think it had to do with the Southern strategy. But how did that documentary hit you?
Well, when we watched the film, one of the things that came up is after the Civil War and the freedom of the slaves, there was no plan for what was going to happen. That was the problem. There was no. It came so abruptly that there was no plan, and it's like, okay, everybody's free, but what are we going to do about that now? How are we going to actually put?
There were blacks who were being elected to things. I mean, that pattern was beginning to come. I mean, it wasn't as, but then that was all taken away. But if Lincoln had not died, things would have been very different. But the vice president and all that. But that's what I think. I may be wrong. But I mean, I believe that after all was over, there were opportunities for blacks to serve in government. Am I wrong on that? For a short time.
Yeah, the Reconstruction period lasted for 13 short years. That was it. But yes, like, even though it was against the law, it was against the law for a white person to teach a black person to read. It was against the law for black people that learned how to read to teach other black people how to read. It was, I mean, against the law. I mean, I can't remember, I might have brought some of the, there's a couple of laws here that I was going to read to you. But definitely, it was against the law. So during this period, like, people learned how to read, basically upon pain of death. But people learned how to read, and there were free people, free black people, and I say free because there were those slave laws of 1850, which means you can be free in Ohio, but if you move to Kentucky, you're free game. So, but there were black people who were educated. And so when the opportunity arose, they say, okay, so we're free, we can run for office, we can, remember, people were rudely interrupted by the miscegenation laws. I often wonder, if that didn't happen, there was no white there was no black, there were just people. Just people. And if those miscegenation laws had not come down, what would this country look like? I often think about that. Because everyone had the same rights. And so we were rudely interrupted in 1681. It was like a battle from that point on to continue your education, etc. But there were free black people. And so when the opportunity arose during the Reconstruction period after the war, people, okay, well, you know, let's run for mayor, let's run for sheriff, let's go for it. So yeah, the opportunities were there. The country, this was a great opportunity for the country at that period to make amends for everything that had gone before, and just pick up and, all right, let's go on. We can move on from this point, but that didn't happen. Yes.
So I just have a question because my historical background is kind of lacking. So my understanding is like in 1681, we would have been separate colony, separate Maryland colony, whatever.
Yes.
So who passed the miscegenation laws, and how were those for each individual colony would have passed those, or how did that work?
Okay. Remember, we were under British rule in 1681, and so in the colonies, because remember, the United States was colonized. We were colonies, the 13 colonies. We were under British rule. We were their colonies in the New World. Okay. So in the colonies, they had governors. And the British elite in Britain are the ones that came up with these laws. And so they passed those laws down, and they passed them to whoever the ruling governor was in each colony. Okay? So that's how that got spread in each colony, each of the 13 colonies, because we were ruled by the British. We were their colony in the New World.
So those would have applied the same rules pretty much across the board.
Yes.
Every colony would have had those same rules then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But then did some people survive through that to continue learning within, because if you're saying like 1618, right? And then
1681.
I'm sorry, 1681.
Mm-hmm.
And then are you saying that because there were educated people along that were still reading, and were they passing that down generation to generation so that some were still reading by the Civil War?
Oh yeah, I mean, people did.
Because in my mind, I think when the Civil War hit, every black person that was in the United States was a slave.
No, that is not true.
Okay.
No. There were people, okay, the first, let's back up just a little bit. The first slave ship, and the first slave ship was from privateers. Okay, so privateers were, they were a group of pirates that pirated another ship. So they got the bounty from another ship. It was either Spanish or Portuguese ship. And from that ship, they were able to gather 20 Africans off of that ship. And then they brought that to, that ship came to Virginia. That was in 1619. That's when the first enslaved Africans came. It wasn't from the transatlantic slave trade. It was from pirating from another ship. So these were pirateers. So that was how that began. And then little by little, there more as the transatlantic slave enterprise continued, more enslaved people from Africa were brought to the colonies. But amidst all of that, there were black people who were not enslaved. There were indentured servants in the colonies that came over from Britain. There were indentured servants in the colonies. They were black. They were white from Europe, and they didn't have any rights either. But that was on a time. It's like, you're an indentured servant, say, for 7 years. And then when your contract is up, we will set you free. And that went for black people as well. So what happened, that the reason that they had the miscegenation laws was because people were starting to get together. They didn't like the British. Who wants to be a colony? Who wants to be colonized? Nobody. All right? So there was starting to be pushback, the rumblings of the Revolutionary War way back then. I mean, people want to be free. Go figure. So people were getting together. And they were still, yes, they were fighting with the native people because, you know, they were taking native land, etc. You know how it is when people get together. All right, so there's a lot of confusion, but people were getting together. And that threatened the British aristocracy. They did not like that, because it's all about control. Those rules, those laws were about controlling the populace. You cannot hold a colony without violence. People are not going to voluntarily be colonized or enslaved. And of course that, you know, it eventually boiled over when people began to really get together when we talked about the Revolutionary War. But there were free people. There were free black people. But again, if you were enslaved, it was against the law. And again, that is a control measure. As far as the United States goes, it's because we came up with this wonderful Constitution, which I will read to you also. It did not include, from the very beginning, it did not include women or any people of color in our Constitution from the very beginning. Everything that we've been doing from that point on has been to, who do we want to be as a people? Do we want to create a country that reforms? Okay, so we didn't start off including, the Constitution was only for white men, white male landholders specifically. So do we want to expand that? That's basically the question. Do we want the Constitution to it's a beautiful document if you don't look at the white male part and believe that it was for everyone. It was not created for everyone. So our work is to decide as a people, do we want it to be that? Do we want the Constitution to be freedom and justice for all, meaning exactly that, meaning everyone? It wasn't born that way, but it needs to evolve that way if this country is to survive, because right now it's being torn apart. And so that really basically is the question. Who do we want to be as a people in terms of the United States? So there's something, I do want to read you something here. Okay. We're going to get to structural racism next week, our last class. But I'm going to read a law to you. This has to do with when we were talking about reading, black people who were educated, being able, during the Reconstruction period, to be able to hold office, be teachers, etc. Here's a law. An act to prevent all persons from teaching slaves to read or write, the use of figures excepted. And the reason why is because if you're working in the field, you have to know how to count. We need you to know how to count, but no reading. And this is a whole whereas this and where, legal documents, whereas the teaching of slaves to read or write has a tendency to excite dissatisfaction in their minds and to produce insurrection and rebellion to the manifest injury of the citizens of this state. Therefore, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of North Carolina, and it's hereby enacted by the authority of the same, that any free person who shall hereafter teach or attempt to teach any slave within the state to read or write, the use of figures excepted, or shall give or sell to such slave or slaves any books or pamphlets, shall be liable to the indictment in any court of record in this state, having jurisdiction thereof, and upon conviction, shall at the discretion of the court, if a white man or woman be fined not less than $100, no more than $200, and at the time that I researched this in 2019, which in 2019 would be $5,526.13. Yeah, as dean. Or imprisoned, and if a free person of color shall be fined, imprisoned, or whipped at the discretion of the court, not exceeding 39 lashes nor less than 20 lashes. Be it further enacted that if any slave should hereafter teach or attempt to teach another slave to read or write, the use of figures excepted, he or she may be carried to any justice of the peace, and on conviction thereof shall be sentenced to receive 39 lashes on his or her bare back. And it goes on and on and on. I have loads of laws. So when people say, I believe, who was it? They were scoffing at the whole idea that there's such a thing as structural racism in this country. That's structural racism, people. That's it. Structural racism are laws specifically to advantage some and disadvantage another group or person. That's structural racism. And our country is built on it. So, Reconstruction. Anybody tell me what the Southern strategy is? During that film, and the reason that I like that particular film, that they had, remember the letters? There was the white woman who was a plantation owner and her husband had gone off to war. And she was in charge of taking care of the plantation in his absence. And they had all of her letters. It was, their letters were read. It was enacted by an actress. But what was her attitude? What was the attitude of the people at that time? The plantation owners.
The lost cause, I mean, they were right in their minds.
Mm-hmm.
And they had lost this war to an evil other.
I remember her being surprised they weren't happy, that they wanted to leave, or they weren't happy.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Somewhat surprised that they weren't, they didn't want to stay there and work.
Who didn't want to stay?
Their former slaves, that they weren't happy. Like,
Oh, yeah,
there was
right.
a letter that she wrote for so long, they don't want to stay.
Right. So, the Southern strategy. What was the Southern strategy? Does anybody can put it to words? There was one gentleman towards the end of that film that basically said it like in 15 seconds. What the Southern strategy was. It is operating today.
I think it's what you just said. There's a system in place to make sure that white people keep the power. And they started the strategies up during that time.
What the gentleman said was, we may have lost the war, but we won Reconstruction.
Yeah.
That's deep. That pulled it all together right there. What's the battle? The battle is for power. If I spread that out a little bit, I can just say the Southern strategy was to crush the black man, never to rise, ever. Keep him in an inferior position, never to be a citizen, never to rise, and to establish white supremacy as the law of the land. That is the Southern strategy. They also mentioned it in relation to almost being a religious belief. I mean, some of the words that they used were quite chilling because that's how it was framed. It was like a religious belief. There are people to this day, many people actually, to this day, that hold very, very true to this. It's almost like it is their religion. This is their reason for living, is to make sure. I think we've heard the term, make America great again. How would you interpret that? Now, see, and now as we're moving along here and trying to piece things together historically, does that make sense to you now? What is the fear and the threat? What are the white people afraid of? That they lose power. Say it loud. Yeah.
So when they talked about how they started to make statues to Confederate generals, and it was almost like branding, like they made the Confederate flag, and you saw that then the story was retold.
Exactly, the story was retold. Exactly. So now, all the statues that we have. When did you think those statues were put in place?
After the
Do you have a time period?
40s through the 60s.
The 20s. There was a resurgence in the 20s, in the 1920s, because at the same time, our scientists, our geneticists, were coming up with their epigenetic theories about the superior race and those that are not worthy or defective. And that was in the 20s. The daughters of the revolution are the ones that were pushing for that, along with Stone Mountain. All this was happening between the 1920s and the 1950s. That whole pushback. So it was the Daughters of the Revolution that were coming up with, the idea was put these statues up of the Civil War heroes.
Daughters of the Confederacy.
Thank you. Daughters of the Confederacy. Yeah, so there was a big resurgence back in the 20s, along with our whole epigenetic, our scientists talking about the purity of the race. The Germans were not the first that came up with that. No. They borrowed from the United States geneticists. Hitler was interested in what we were doing here in the 20s. And so he started to study some of our genetic studies. Also, he was looking at the Jim Crow laws that sprang up after Reconstruction to see how maybe he could use that in Germany. This is our country. We got to get going here and help it out a little. Not going too well. I have a little exercise here. So after we talked about, well, before I do that, we do want to talk about cotton picking and the slave market. So we're under the Southern Strategy, and when we're talking about, kind of feedback here, Sean.
Yeah, please push.
And we were talking about that whole period up until people were, quote, free. I have some cotton balls here, and I have some statistics for you. So if you would take, I'll just pass this around the room, everybody take one or two of them. I should have enough. This is important when we were talking about the 40 acres and a mule. Congress sent the final legislation of the Homestead Act of 1862 to President Abraham Lincoln, who signed it into law in May of 1862. Anybody remember the Homestead Act? For everybody that, likes small government. The Homestead Act encouraged Western migration by providing white settlers with 160 acres of land in exchange for a nominal filing fee. Among its provisions was a 5-year requirement of continuous residence before receiving the title to the land, and the settlers had to be, or in the process of becoming, U.S. citizens. This was only open to white males. Okay? So, when we talk about structural racism, white women couldn't get this. You couldn't get, no land for you. Only white males. Coming from Europe, just got here, over white women who had been here for a while, but you could not have it. So, if you look at the inequities, this was built into our system. This was our system of government. This Homestead Act lasted through 1986. When the last claim was made in Alaska, the Homestead Act distributed 270 million acres of land in the United States, making it one of the most far-reaching pieces of legislation in American history. Talk about a giveaway. A nominal filing fee, up to 160 acres of land, it's yours. Sit on it for 5 years, and while you're at it, improve it a little bit. Be in the process of becoming a citizen. You're done. Welcome to America. Okay, so at the same time that they denied 40 acres and a mule to black people who had worked the land, built the country for a couple hundred years, you get nothing. Nothing. We're we're picking you off the land. In fact, that's basically what they did. That's when they created the neo-slavery called sharecropping, which I don't have time to go into all this. So I'm hoping that you will research some of this. So everybody's got a cotton ball? All right, hold it in your hand. In general, planters expected a good slave to work 10 acres of land and pick 200 pounds of cotton per day. Men, women, and children. 200 pounds. If I gave you that whole bag to hold,
It's not even enough.
okay? An overseer or master would measure each individual slave's daily yield. Great pressure existed to meet the expected daily amount, and some masters whipped slaves who picked less than expected. From sunup to sundown. Sunup to sundown. That's what you do. The United States was the supplied cotton for the world. The world. England, it was shipped to England. Their ports at Liverpool would receive huge shipments of cotton. That's where the rest of the world, they didn't grow cotton in Sweden. Okay? Where did they get the cotton? They got it all from the blood of black people. That's where the cotton came from. So when you hold that cotton ball in your hand, I mean, I couldn't even wrap my mind around that. 200 pounds? Anybody know how large, can you picture? I lived in the country for a couple of years on a 2-acre plot, but the plot that was behind ours was 12 acres of land. That is a lot of land. 10 acres a day? 200 pounds a day? How is that even possible? So that is how our country became wealthy. Tobacco, rice, sugar, cotton. All of those worked by enslaved African people. And that is where the country got its wealth. That's where the United States got its wealth, from that. Anybody see the movie 12 Years a Slave? I didn't. Anybody? You did? Yeah. There are some things that are so traumatizing that I can't watch them. But I wanted to give you some idea. The gentleman that was the main character, his name was Solomon Northup, a real person. He wrote a book. He remembers the New Orleans slave market. Solomon Northup was a free black man living in Saratoga, New York, when he was kidnapped and sold into slavery in 1841, because you could do that. Modern day policing started in the colonies as people who were men on horseback were given a badge and a horse and a gun, and their job was to round up runaway enslaved people. So that was the beginning of modern day policing in our country. So Solomon Northup was a free black man when he was kidnapped and sold into slavery in 1841. He later escaped and wrote a book about his experiences, 12 Years a Slave. Narrative of Solomon Northup, a citizen of New York. This is the whole title. When I read this, I laughed. His book, 12 Years a Slave, narrative of Solomon Northup, a citizen of New York, kidnapped in Washington City in 1841 and rescued in 1853. That was his book title, which was made into the 2013 Academy Award-winning film. This excerpt derives from Northup's descriptions of being sold in New Orleans, along with fellow slave Eliza and her children, Randall and Emily. So here's his description. One old gentleman who said he wanted a coachman appeared to take a fancy to me. The same man also purchased Randall, the little boy. The little fellow was made to jump and run across the floor, and I performed many other feats, exhibiting his activity and condition. All the time the trade was going on, Eliza, the mother, was crying aloud and wringing her hands. She besought the man not to buy him unless he also bought herself and Emily, her little girl. The gentleman, Freeman, turned around to her savagely with his whip in his uplifted hand, ordering her to stop her noise or he would flog her. He would not have such work, such sniveling, and unless she ceased that minute, he would take her to the yard and give her 100 lashes. Eliza shrunk before him and tried to wipe away her tears, but it was all in vain. She wanted to be with her children, she said, the little time she had to live. All the frowns and threats of Freeman could not wholly silence the afflicted mother. And his book, I just want this work that we're doing here, you have to be able to feel your way through this. You know, at the end of this, if anyone says, and I've seen some videos where I just recently, McConnell is definitely against any kind of reparations for black people. There's a film clip that I was looking at. He's going, you know, like, well, for one, it happened so long ago. I mean, who would we give it to? I mean, just all these excuses as to why black people should not be compensated for building the United States of America. What's frightening about that is his abysmal ignorance. All of you here only had 3 classes, and you know more about black history than he will ever know, because he's not going to investigate. All of you know more than he does, and yet he is a senator. He's making laws. Now you magnify that by all those white congressmen and senators who are making laws in the country. Oh, the ones that are fighting over whether people who are on SNAP should be able to buy snack food. Millionaires, all of them. Deciding if you're worthy of having a bag of potato chips with your SNAP card. I mean, that's where we are. Do you see? And these are the people who are totally ignorant of all of this information passing legislation. Now that's the scary part right there. That is very, very scary. So I want you to be able to feel your way through this So when people come to you and say, well, there's no such thing as structural racism, or I don't believe that, we should be worrying about things like reparations, giving black people money. I want you to be able to come up with an answer. That's why you're doing this work. So when you go out in the community and you run into people who don't mind giving you their opinion because you're white too, so, the good old boy, you know what I'm talking about, the good old club, I can say this nonsense to you, never dreaming that you might even be insulted by it. They take it for granted. You run into people like that, say the most outrageous things, not even think that you would be insulted by saying such inhumane things about human beings. Your work will be able to shut these people down. That's what we're working for. You are the accomplices. My job is to sit here and open it up for you and help you move along with it. Your job is to continue to do the work. But it is an internal thing. It really is, to be able to feel that. Either we all vote or nobody votes. Forget the gerrymandering. What is that? But just an attempt to what? Keep people from being citizens. Even if you've been in the country, your ancestors have been here for several hundred years. We all vote or no one, because that's the country. See, that's how I want you to start thinking. What kind of country do you want? That is what's up for grabs right now. That's what's up for grabs. There's a group that wants to go back to the good old days, God help us. What they mean by good old days. Or do we want something new? That is the question. That is what is being decided right now. That's what these elections are about. That's what all the hysteria is about. Gerrymandering, lying. The agenda is not even quiet anymore. People are just coming out and saying, yeah, that's what we want. Do you see? And so it will take a movement of people. I will call you humanists. You are human beings and you believe in other human beings no matter what, to change the narrative, because the fight is for the narrative. Whoever controls the narrative controls the country, has the power. So that's what we're working for. So this job is open to everybody, whoever wants to do it. You got a question?
I was just wondering, what are some of the ideas about reparations that you would see as being most appropriate?
Well, the reason I had you look at post-traumatic slave syndrome by Dr. Joy DeBruy was to give you, again, some idea of the trauma and the damage that had been done. And I love my people so much because black people are a miracle. That we had gone, and our ancestors had gone through all of this, and as Maya Angelou says, and still we rise. I always think in terms of mental and emotional help. Because a lot of, did I give you the RBF? This will answer the question too. Could you pass this out for me, please? I'm sure everybody gets one of those. Racial battle fatigue, because this kind of goes to your question. Racial battle fatigue, the impact what is the impact of all of this? All right? Racial battle fatigue was a term coined in 2003 by African-American social psychologist Dr. William A. Smith. And so Dr. Smith describes racial battle fatigue as a public health and mental health illness. So if you're, in terms of reparations, I mean, money is one thing, and that is definitely necessary. But I believe education, college education, education for anyone that, black people that need or want to go to college, tutoring, help for children who are now in substandard schools, while we work to change the law or the way that we fund our schools so we don't have substandard schools in the first place. That was, again, a racial move. There's so many things that have to be corrected, old systems that need to be torn down. In my mind, that would be part of reparations.
Patricia, some cities and colleges are already instituting reparations.
In California, I believe that they were working on that.
Yes.
Yes. So that, I mean, that is a start. I'm looking at it. When you look at this page on racial battle fatigue, just, I mean, imagine, I know I've had someone call me, a young black woman professional. I got a text, 10 o'clock at night. Could you say a prayer for me? I'm not doing well. And I text her back, I said, well, what's going on? She says she's sitting on the floor in her shower, and she is basically having a breakdown. This will get into DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, because you go to work and you're working for people who have no idea what you're experiencing, you're going through. So they can't address it, or they dismiss your concerns. They will ask you, and this is real. I'm dealing with people right now. They're stressed. You go to work, you get in your car, you're wondering whether you're going to be stopped on the highway by a policeman because he can. This is before you get to work. You go to work with people who make conscious or unconscious racial bias jokes or comments, including your boss. Then your boss asks you, what's wrong? You look down, you look depressed, etc., etc. Maybe they'll call a meeting. So you have the personnel director, maybe the head of the company, and your boss. 3 white people. And you're sitting there facing them, and you're supposed to spill your guts about how you feel. And they don't have a clue. And even when you do, they don't believe you. Or they dismiss what you have to say because it's not their experience. I've had an administrator, as I was working in a DEI capacity at a company, and I spent 20 minutes explaining to this young administrator what the issues were, what was going on, how some of the black employees were really suffering. And he said to me, well, I'm not black, so I can't feel any of this. It's like, and I remember just sitting there trying to, okay, Patricia, don't lose it. Pulling myself together and just trying to, on the spot, trying to, okay, how do I proceed? Where do we go now? So I've spent 40 minutes in this man's office, And the issues, this was several months ago, the issues are still going on at this company. Because white people, this is part of the programming, white people for hundreds of years have been programmed not to believe black people. Black people don't feel pain. I mean, I can go on and on. When we get to Harriet Washington's medical apartheid, that'll be the next assignment. When you look at that, it's like, okay, so how do you get through to people? This is why DEI is important. I would definitely, as part of reparations, I would have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all staff members and all employees, because that would go a long way in helping black people perform better at their work when they're not dancing around all of this craziness every day. When you read the symptoms, someone asked me, why do black people cuss so much? It's part of racial battle fatigue. It's right on here. The tremendous stress. Black people's blood pressure does not go down at night. So normally when people are in a, quote, resting state, your blood pressure goes down. Black people's blood pressure does not go down at night, because being in a constant state of hyper vigilance, waiting for the next attack. That is the impact of white supremacy daily. Along with some of the Jim Crow laws that are still operating for black people. I was talking, my daughter and I were having a conversation, and we were talking about some of the things that we do when we go into a store. Like, always, do you want to?
Well, when I go into a store, I always assume that I'm being watched. In the sense of, let's say I get my cell phone out of my purse, and in the store aisle, I make a show of I'm just putting my phone back into my purse. Nothing else. I don't bring big purses anywhere. I make it very clear. I am a law-abiding citizen, not an intruder. And it's something that it developed over time as I was an adult, being more aware of that. But once you've seen some things, you tend to want to protect yourself from that sort of thinking and assumptions. There's certain assumptions that are made. And I'm not saying I'm immune to those biases myself. But it is, to me, really important to make it easier for everyone else to say, oh, yeah. And that is what happens. As someone who, as you can see, could ask for something from other people, I have been on the side of that privilege as well. And knowing that I will not be judged of it. So I've seen it from both sides, I would say. I've kind of seen this experience from both sides. And I can verify that it is a real concern. And assumptions and biases actually happen. That's a piece of it.
It's real. It is real. There's some stores I will not go into. I will not go into Sephora or Ulta. They got busted a couple years ago, just a couple years ago, because there were company memos. They had code words for black people who come into the store to shop. And so it's that, do I really want that red lipstick? do I want to go into the store and experience, someone following me around? The assumption is, if you're black, you're going to steal something. It doesn't matter how much money you have. None of that matters. It's just bam. Soon as you wake up, there is meaning attached to the color of your skin. And so, and people making assumptions, and that is one of the assumptions. So it's like, no, I don't want to go to that store today.